All right, guys, we are continuing our Seeing Through Gebser series. We finally finished up with the history of the phenomena of soul and spirits. Now we are moving on into the next section. In this edition, we are on page 248. We are in section 7, the previous forms of realization and thought. And then the first little subsection is dimensioning and realization. So don't get too excited. We're not going to be figuring it all out yet. That'll be later in the book, but we're just kind of wet our beak, if you will. Now, this video might be a little shorter. I apologize. This week, I've just got a ton going on in my personal life right now, and I just, priorities and stuff. But without further ado, let's get right into it. Gebser says, nothing would be easier than to give in to the lure of employing in this discussion the abstracting, descriptive form of writing so esteemed today with its deficient quantitative modes of expression. But an ever-increasing division, dissolution, and separation will never yield a whole, nor even its opposite, which might at least represent it negatively. We have endeavored, accordingly, to avoid mere evocation in our presentation of the magic, and mere mythologization in our description of the mythical structure, and have shunned by the same token mere ratiocination in our attempt to make the mental structure comprehensible. Anyone who is at home in the three-dimensional coordinate system, whose enclosure affords him security, will find our deliberations unwelcome. Some may even be indignant. So you guys haven't seen this yet, or maybe you did. I just did a Kill Rationalism video, how to argue with rationalists and why, and that's one of the big points I talked about. You're going to be breaking down their walls, and that's going to be a problem because you need those walls. They act as psychological foundation and security for you to survive and thrive. So we're breaking down their walls, but we're constructing sturdier ones. Some may even be indignant. But what emerges in indignation if not the rationally restrained psychic content? The indignant are aroused by something that breaks through the rational confines and erupts with natural and emphatic force in negative manifestations that reveal the depths within themselves about which they become indignant. I love Gebser. You have to remember he was a psychologist at heart, so he knows what he's talking about when it comes to psychology. Reveals the depths within them. Yet these depths reach only to the perspectival point, and where this becomes questionable, the indignant also believe the protective walls of their three-dimensional world to be in question. They imagine, and the imagery exposes them once more to the mythical realm from which reason has freed them, that the walls they erect could provide the necessary security. Every wall, however, has the inherent possibility of transformation. Thus, the indignant, despite all willful exertions, are still housed in a rather fragile world. So their indignance, when you start to deconstruct their rationalism, makes very clear that they are not as well secured as they thought they were. They would be if they were integral consciousness, but they're not. They're rationalists. Given this insecure security, it is no wonder that the indignant should find it disagreeable to bother with other coordinate systems, such as the two-dimensional outlined in the previous chapter. In the two-dimensional structure, the third or space-constituting coordinate or dimension was missing, and where in the rational world a wall exists, there was an actual and continuous transformation. Today, too many people are uncomfortable when they are reminded of transitoriness and change, but it is undoubtedly necessary to point out that this firm-walled, three-dimensional world is subject to the possibility of change. Someone who dares to approach these matters will, however, seem to threaten the hard-won security, and we can hardly be surprised that the reaction to his diagnosis will either correspond or be commensurate to that threat. So this is the point I was making in my How to Argue with Rationalists video. It makes sense that when you're knocking down their walls that act as the foundation for their entire life, you're going to see some emotional pushback. It's not entirely bad. It's not exclusive to rationalists, this sort of flaw. They think they've won that security. The extraction of clear thought from the mythical and magical structures was very hard won. It cost a lot of lives, a lot of violence, and a lot of psychological turbulence. So when we knock that down, it makes sense that they would want to retain that because that's secure. Besides, what else has he to offer in this place of this security? The journey made in the last chapter to the dead and living waters, to the well springs? No, rationalists would never offer that because they are skeptical of the phenomena. It is doubtful whether these well springs could bring much joy, since they apparently offer little of the security sought so insistently by rational man. It is more likely that they may be, in the first place, a form of torment. That is to say, the emotions and the irrational, quantifiably measurable aspects are seen as torment. And when I was a rationalist, they were. I remember thinking to myself, why can't we just not have these emotions and everything will be fine? It's not that simple. We should not find this surprising, since well springs, quellen, Quellen, and torments, qualen, Qualen, stem from the same root. Fascinating. Our endeavor in the present work is not to glorify the past. We do not advocate a return or a regression any more than a progression forward. Very important for all you. I assuming if you're watching this far, you're not a rationalist, but they will throw this at you. Oh, you just want to go back to deficient irrationality. No, no, no. Our concern is with the ever present. Far be it from us, in other words, to disqualify our mental illumination in favor of the brightness of the roots. What matters to us is showing their constitutional differences, and this is possible only with the help of our mental illumination. And we are also concerned with the particular dimensional conditionality, temporal limitations, and restrictions of the individual modes of illumination as they are respectively lived, experienced, and conceptualized in the darkness of the magic root, the twilight of mythical agitation, and the illumination of the mental space world. So clearly we can see how our mental understanding affords clarity and order to our deliberations on the evolution of consciousness structure. You would not be able to understand this evolution without the mental structure. Mental structure is not inherently a bad thing. I love rationality. I don't like rationalism. If we realize and integrate these conditions, limitations, and restrictions, we shall sustain the world, and the world will wear us in truth. That is to say, if we integrate all the consciousness structures, recognize the limitations, their efficient, deficient aspects, then we can have a sort of truth, the truth of the world no longer obstructed by all the artificial projections that are the structures. The verity of the whole will be perceptible, present, and transparent through integration, since it then shines through and suffuses all things. This is, of course, the second part of the book. As a means of clarifying the various thought structures, it has been customary to speak of thought forms in quotes. These definitions relate in part to actual thinking, and for the rest to what we should call pre-forms of thought. Now, I will say, when it gets to actual clear thought, rational thought, obviously the rationalists are always going to win that game. I almost feel uncomfortable calling the mythical thought exactly that, thoughts, because it's not thought proper. Rationality has thought proper, where it makes fucking sense. But the other stuff, which we'll be getting to in a second, it doesn't really. it's like, what? It does. I don't want to spoil it, but when you're the rationalists do have a home turf, so to speak, and that's clear mental thinking. So if you fight them on that ground, you might not win, which isn't a bad thing, because if it's appropriate to use it, then use it. These definitions relate in part to actual thinking, which is a rational thought, and for the rest to what we should like to call preforms of thought. If we base our observations on the mutations we have discerned, thought forms are valid only as they pertain to the mental structure. Only the mental structure, because of its consciously formed directedness, recognize thought as being distinct from all other previous realizational forms. It's the beauty of the mental structure. If we wish to attribute thought forms to the other structures, we would not be able to speak of thought in the mythical structure, but only of being thought. And with respect to the magic structure, not even being thought, but only of being in thought. Excuse me. It is assumed in these definitions that there was thought before the thinker. Now, I put in my little liner here. Schopenhauer. Sight, the ability or function of sight, willed the organs of eyes into existence to carry out sight, to manifest sight. So it's very similar. If you're familiar with basic Schopenhauer, that's kind of what he's pulling on. That there was thought before the thinker, as there was breath before the breather, and sight before the eye. To explain this in rational terms, we must suppose that the power of a possible manifestation itself creates an organ able to manifest this power. So beautifully put, very simple. As applied to our own lives, this statement shows that it is our inherent possibilities which shape the circumstances and the way we lead our lives in such a way as to allow these possibilities to become effective. In other words, the components in us which are to enter our mental awareness also create the preconditions for their own effective realization. So when he said that the inherent internal possibilities, this is why it's important to concretize the soul, to reject the rationalist aversion to delving inwards because it's painful, it's quantifiably immeasurable, it's not conducive to rational thought. I don't care. That's where all of our possibilities lie. And then, of course, externalization is just that second pole, that corresponding complement. So you don't toss that aside entirely. But this is why we go inward and we accept the pain. We kill the ego we kill every defeat to the ego is a victory for the self. Always keep that in mind. In other words, the components in us which are to end. Okay, I understand. As long as we fail to see this, we attribute our disposition and unrealized latency, which strive toward their necessary unfolding, to an intrusion of chance or destiny. But chance and destiny are merely the agencies which release the intensities in ourselves which are ready for manifestation. It is these intensities that cause the decisive events to happen by chance or destine these events for us. So kind of building off what I just said. If the inherent possibilities determine the external actualization, well, it's probably wise to look inward and have a full understanding of what's going on here so you can healthily channel them, use them for productive purposes, for moral purposes, use them to guide your rational movement, stuff like that. So think of it like you're drinking beers with some family friends and maybe smoking some cigarettes or whatever, and you just think, you're kind of reminiscing on your life and you think, man, the fact that I ended up with her, there were so many times where I said no or the timing wasn't right, but it feels like it was just chance and destiny, and that's my life. It was just destiny. No, you had internal potencies and energies that needed to unfold, and because you were a rationalist and you did not healthily channel these things, they just came out anyways, and you got a little lucky that they didn't ruin your life, and they happened to be that way. It could have been a lot better, and it could have been a lot worse. So keep that in mind. The intensities manage the chance and destiny so that the possibilities for their own manifestation occur. In a word, we are our chances and destiny. We are our chances and destiny. Destiny is within you. So if you are worried about your destiny or you want to improve it, you need to look inward. I don't care if it's immeasurable. Don't care. Here's a parenthesis, he says. So he says, in a word, we are our chances and destiny. Very self-empowering. Great. As long as positive events are understood, no one will quarrel with this definition. But where we speak of negative ones, only relatively few will admit to having brought them about. So it's really easy when things go well and you say, I'm just the man. I got it in me. I'm just better than people. My destiny is good, like when good things happen, when you marry the girl you've always loved, when you get the job you wanted, when you win the lottery, things are great. But when bad things happen, all of a sudden, no, it wasn't me. It was the world. It was my neighbor Tom. It was no. Okay, yeah, we got it, buddy. The question of the forms of realization is therefore a question as to the form, kind, or manner in which reality is realized in each individual structure. If we continue to hold to the characteristics and attributes which distinguish the individual structures in us, it follows that the realization form of the magic structure is living, that is, vital experience. This is kind of a summary. Of the mythical structure, an undergone or psychic experience, and of the mental structure, a form of comprehending, conceiving, and representing. Excuse me. This definition would seem to us to be more distinct than the form selected above of being thought, and thinking. Such a differentiation is conceivable only in perspectival terms as a view backwards from the standpoint of the mental structure, whereas the one chosen here is more in keeping with the increasing dimensionality of the respective structures. So quick repeat for emphasis, just to put in a single line summation of what these new structures mean. The question of the forms of realization is therefore a question as to the form, kind, or manner in which reality is realized in each individual structure. So that's what we're going to be getting into. So that was the beginning. That was the end of the first section, very short. So now we're getting into vital experiencing and undergone or psychic experience. So of course, as you just said, this will be how things are realized in the magical world and how things are realized in the mythical world. Now, don't get too excited, unfortunately, because these are, again, a little more outlines. We're going to be doing more later, but outlines are still good. Vital experiencing belongs to the vitally accentuated magic structure. Such experience is entirely univalent, of course, the unity, incomprehensible in conceptual terms, and inexplicable, all of which does not diminish its effectiveness, but perhaps even increases it. So vital experience cannot be understood by rational mental conception. At best, you can rationalize it after the fact, but it's just not conducive to it. I don't know what to say. Now, don't sacrifice rationality, but have a new respect for vital experience and the knowledge delivered to you by the vital forces, the vital instincts, the vital drives, the magical way of doing things. It may have once had extensive ties to the numinosum, which at the outset of this consciousness structure was presumably not yet a unilateral projection of man, but rather together with man formed a unitary phenomenon. Magic Man was, it will be recalled, indistinguishably bound to all things, and this pars pro toto is expressed in the power or potency of all genuine vital experience. There's a real power and potency to genuine vital experiences. The reason why, you have to remember, the Magic Man, unlike us, was the first one to release themselves from the subconscious of nature. They were fully entrenched with it. I believe it was the last video I did, or maybe the one before that. We talked about how the number 9 and how important that was to Magic Man, but also the importance of 9 being to gestation and life. So it takes, of course, 9 months for the baby to come out. Magic Man didn't know this rationally speaking, but they knew it in a different way because they were closely connected to the subconscious of nature. Their knowledge was received through non-rational means, and yet it was still very resonant, compact, and profound. It is the united and unitary background which becomes acute in each vital experience. This will also explain how Magic Man interprets things. From within his own merging with events, he immediately places any occurrence, event, or object that for him has the nature of a vital experience into a unifying context. Repeat for emphasis. This is how Magic Man interprets things. From within his own merging with events, he immediately places any occurrence, event, or object that for him has the nature of a vital experience into a unifying context. Very simple. Such a mode of establishing a context of relationships by experiencing a vital nexus, as we have called it, is not only pre-rational and pre-causal, as befits the space-timeless magic world, it elicits above and beyond this a still sleep-like consciousness of being interwoven with events and is recognizable by its associative analogizing, and sympathetic treatment of things that cannot be considered quote-unquote thinking. So anything it sees that has any sort of vital aspect or nature to it, it is going to be put in that point-like, dot-like unifying context. Think of the atom. Everything is contained within the atom, and when it explodes, everything is externalized and kind of breaks forth. The atom is very small, obviously. It's a dot. It is a point, and yet it contains everything. Same thing with the Magic Man's conception of the world. Let's see. It is in the vital experience that the first inkling or dawning awareness takes on a point-like contour. From the bountiful effectualities dispersed throughout the world, and also because of Magic Man's fusion with it, this awareness is able to make one of these effectualities experienceable. Since in the magic structure, the part always represents the whole, Magic Man can experience himself as well as the world. Here are the reasons for the overwhelming power of such experiencing even today. Every true vital experience manifestly realizes the unity of the world and the fundamental unity of the individual with the world. Repeat for emphasis. Every true vital experience manifestly realizes the unity of the world and the fundamental unity of the individual with the world. Although only dimly conscious, such realization is consciousness forming and prepares at the very least the mythical and mental consciousness. Every vital experience is the unbeknown realization of unity. And the emphasis on unity suggests that such experiencing is a form of realization of the magic structure. Every vital experience is the unbeknown realization of unity. So if you're arguing with rationalists and they ask you, what is experiential knowledge? What does that mean? It's the unbeknown realization of unity. That is to say, of the world in all of its aspects and you with the world. Very simple. So we kind of finished with magic in this section, so now we're going to go to mythical here. Undergone or psychic experience is something quite different. Its psychic emphasis always includes the polar ambivalent moment, since it manifests agitation and not just the point-like vital dynamism that shapes the character of vital experiencing. Undergone experience is always experienced by the soul. So it's really an experience that is so profound and powerful that it transforms the soul. It is polar because it is not just something we endure passively, but is at the same time a twilight, half-conscious act, since we experience ourselves in the world or the sea. In such experience, the world, and its counterpart, the soul, move toward the threshold of mental consciousness. Truly undergone experience is always irrational. The soul teaches us what our understanding cannot grasp or estimate. As the adage suggests, experience is the best teacher. Beautifully said. Undergone experience is always irrational. The soul teaches us what our understanding cannot grasp or estimate. God forbid if you were to lose a child. God forbid if you were to lose a brother or something extreme. Maybe you lost your town in Katrina, some sort of natural event like that. The lessons you learn, the knowledge you attain based on those experiences, emphasis on the word experience, is delivered to you through irrational means. The soul, in all its irrationality, and in the way that you've been moving through the two poles and constantly, has taught you something that the mental structure and rationality, because it is limited, simply cannot grasp or estimate. This is the power of bringing rationality back to its moderated position and re-privileging undergone experience and vital experience and balancing them. These do not negate each other. Undergone experience does not negate rational knowledge and vice versa. Use all of these and you will become a new human. They will see a God on Wednesday from the man they saw on Tuesday. Excuse me. The insight of such experience, that is, insight into psychic polarity and reality, distinguishes every undergone experience from both point-like vital experience and causal understanding. So the difference between the experiential knowledge derived from the mythical structure and the experiential knowledge derived from the magic structure, there's always a second dimension in the mythical. There's always some sort of soul reflection, agitation. There's always not just unity, right? There has to be some sort of reflection, or there has to be insight into psychic polarity, life and death, good and evil, hell, heaven and hell, stuff like that. Once you see stuff like that, that's when you know you're in the mythical. While vital experience creates our initial awareness of the world's contours, undergone experience opens up the first temporally bound images of the soul. So there you go. So the vital experiences kind of situates you and grounds you in the world. Yes, this mouse pad is here. Yes, this water bottle is here. Yes, this beautiful face, a young Brad Pitt, is right here. Great. But what happens when I reflect on these things irrationally and of the soul? That's the difference. Each experience is a partially known realization of polar complementarity, and inasmuch as the polar moment is accentuated, every undergone experience is a mythical form of realization, and as such a prefiguration of mental understanding. Vital experiencing is based throughout on empathy and identification. That's magic, of course. It is univalent and one-dimensional. Undergone experience, by contrast, has as its basis the polarity of the soul. And this polarity becomes expressible because it has been imprinted on us in image and through the internalization of memory. So the soul produces images that express its polarity, and those images press themselves on your consciousness, and now you, through the internalization of memory, can now externalize that, and in externalizing that, use that to guide your life and make things better. Inasmuch as it represents and realizes the relationship and the interplay between the soul's poles, undergone experience is ambivalent and two-dimensional. Conceptualization, or ideation, on the other hand, is trivalent, three-dimensional. We may legitimately regard this third conceptual form of realization, appropriate to the mental structure, as a form of thinking. It is, however, important that we subdivide it into three essentially different forms: oceanic or circling thinking, paradoxical thinking, and perspectival thinking. So we're going to start with oceanic thinking. That's as far as we're going to get today. And then we are going to switch to perspectival thinking, which we've already kind of covered, but it's good to get a reminder. Then we're going to get into paradoxical thinking. And paradoxical thinking is fascinating. It's rationally, you might see it as nothing. It's who cares? Paradoxes are stupid. No, they are a sign of transcendence of mere rationality. Give me one sec. I should have done this before. Okay. Sorry about that. Now we're going to get into oceanic thinking. By the way, for you philosophy guys, this was very profound to me. It might not be profound to you. Maybe you guys probably covered this in school, but I made a huge realization. I'll talk about it at the end of this video. But I made like a huge realization of going through this. But we're going to be talking about like Heraclitus. So if you're a philosophy student and you thought Heraclitus had some okay things, but a lot of what he said was just gibberish, this is a way of understanding Heraclitus on his own terms. Okay, oceanic thinking could be also described as oceanic circling. But inasmuch as it also posits and postulates, immediately modifying the posited by a new postulation, and ultimately returning to the point of inception, it is more than a circular combination of images or representations. Leisgang has designated it as circular thinking or chain thinking, as opposed to conceptual or pyramidal thinking, a form of thought which Julius Stenzel attributes to Socratic Aristotelian dialectic. We have deliberately chosen the term oceanic because it is reminiscent of mythical image, and because it is a form of thought closely tied to the mythical structure. I don't need to read them. Heraclitus furnishes numerous examples of oceanic thinking. We must not overlook, however, that Heraclitus has already formulated expressly directed mental statements, a fact apparently ignored by Leisgang. If we follow Leisgang's concise and literal translation of fragment 22b36, the oceanic thinking appears as follows. Quote, is from Heraclitus. Quote, for souls it is death to become water. For water it is death to become earth. But from the earth comes water, and from water, soul. So I'm going to show you a picture of it. I'm going to hide this because that'll be good. This is the, let's see, can you see it there? Yeah, it's not really the best there. This can be represented even more vividly if we show the cyclic motion of thoughts, beginning with one concept to which others are added before the return to the initial concept. In this diagram, we must not overlook the fact that this thought movement circles around a central content. In this particular example, death. Now, this might be a little better. This, my friend, is circular thinking. So if you can't see, we have A, which is soul. We're going to read Heraclitus's statement again. Soul's death becomes water. Let me see. For souls, it is death to become water. So A, we start with A. We have soul. It is death to become water, which leads us to B. For souls, it is death. Let me see. For water, it is death to become earth. So B is water. And we have a new component here. So we're going to go from B down to C. So we have A is soul, B is water, C is earth. Okay, we're starting. Let's finish the statement. But from earth comes water, so we're going to go back to C, which is earth, up to B again, which is, of course, water. And then he says, and from water, soul. So now we'll read it one more time, and I'll just kind of circle all the way through. For souls, it is death to become water, A to B. For water, it is death to become earth, B to C. But from earth comes water, C to B. And from water, soul, A. So you can very clearly see the circular thought here. Now, this is irrational, to be clear. This is not rational thinking. But nonetheless, this is how a lot of people thought. Notice also there is content inside the circle. It's very important. There's content. We're not thinking. We're circumscribing. It's a very important difference. So it's very simple. We've got A to B to C to B to A again. So we finish where we start. So for all you philosophy students, maybe you already knew that, I will admit. But this is what, when I read this, it hit me like a ton of bricks. Like, oh, this is why every time you walk into your average philosophy class and you go, when did philosophy really start? I'm not asking for the literal first philosopher, but when did it really get going? And they always say Socrates and Plato. Why would they say that? Because before that, we had a bunch of this. Rationally speaking, this is barely comprehensible. But it hit me like a ton of. Now, again, for philosophy students, that might not be that profound, but for me, it was like, oh, that's why Plato gets viewed as like the beginning of philosophy proper. So that was cool. Okay. Let's see. Okay. A further instance of oceanic thinking is the beginning of the Gospel of St. John. Here, too, we find a polarization of concepts in a circular process. Concept A is associated with pole B. Pole B is then repeated and related to a new pole, C. The process is then reversed from C to B until B is once again related to A, thus completing the circle. So just kind of going again. You can see A to B to C, and we go all the way back. Everything is circular. Here we again notice the circular movement of polarizing thought in the series A to B, B to C, C to B, B to A. Once you get the circular, it actually becomes very easy to get because it's not like it's hard. The silent beginning forms a pole to the spoken beginning, the logos. This forms a pole to the speak. Oh, I should probably read the statement. In the beginning was the logos, and the logos was with God, and God was the logos. The same, the logos, was in the beginning with God. Rationally, this is barely comprehensible. Silent beginning forms a pole to the spoken beginning. The logos, this forms a pole to the speaker, God, and from their reverse return to the silent pole. It is a process of self-complementation, and the central concept, here circumscribed rather than described, is God. So rational thought describes. Mythical thought, now of course, if you haven't noticed the 2D flat circle, that's obviously going to be representation of the symbol of the mythical structure. Circumscribed, it's here to just outline what is already there. It's a content, we're not describing anything. Okay. The fact that oceanic thinking circumscribes something is a vivid demonstration that the mythical circular world has a content. So when people, if you read my, actually we'll get there. Say what you will about the mythical man, right? Say what you will about irrational mythology. I get it. There is meaning in there. There is purpose in there. There's meaning. There's content. There is soul-sustaining, spirit-sustaining content that you do not see with the empty space of rational thought, which we're about to get into. So the circular world has a content. There is meaning inside of the content. And you can see this very obviously play out in the form of religions, spiritual pursuits, the Bible, the Quran, the Bhagavad Gita, all this stuff. It is filled with meaning. By destroying the circle with directed thinking, man, to the extent that he is mental man, has lost this content. So rational thought said, that's all irrational, all that meaning, and that's we're done with that. So we're tossing out that meaning. We're just going to go with this. For space is without content. The lack of content, which initially appears as openness, becomes obvious in the deficient rational phase of the mental structure. I have a Substack article that actually got pretty good numbers. Excuse me. And it's called Which Way, Western Man? Openness or Emptiness? And it's about this exact topic right here and how rationality built America. Of course, that was preceded by the discovery of space. And the question is, well, what is space? Is it open or is it empty? My thesis was it might have been open for a while because, of course, that openness was interpreted as freedom. But now openness has turned to emptiness. When rationality turned to rationalism, that openness turned to emptiness. So now it's spiritual detachment and nihilistic violence and all this crap. So if you're interested, go check that article out. This openness has been described ever since as emptiness. Indeed, since then, it is emptiness. For that reason, any mere description is today empty and non-committal. Interesting. In this sense, descriptions are rational, flattened, and quantified attributions that initially had a mental value and made our conceptual world possible. Circumlocutions, on the other hand, the circular thinking, as in the examples of Heraclitus and St. John, suggest the close proximity of oceanic thinking to mix. So rationality doesn't do well with meaning. It extracts meaning. When I describe something, I'm doing exactly that, extracting all the meaning. That openness and emptiness is manifesting itself. Yet a further point should be made to set off oceanic from mental rational thinking. In oceanic thinking, the quote, not only but also always holds true, while in mental thinking only the either or is valid. Weihinger, with his philosophy of the as if, and Kierkegaard, with his either or, have provided prime examples of these thought forms, Kierkegaard having proceeded along the lines of paradox. The not only but also is not only indecisive but also inseparable, like the soul itself, owing to its ambivalence, its polarity, and its propensity for symbol. It is itself not only but also. The either or, by contrast, contains the decision or decisiveness known only to the mind which must take a one-sided position, mental structure. Now, we should not assume that it can be opposed to the not only but also, because it expresses a form of thought which is constitutionally different from the oceanic. We can define this thought form as thinking in the soul, which is most likely what Dionysius Areopagita meant when he wrote, "To the soul, circular movement means its entry from outside to the inner self. The linear movement ultimately belongs to the soul when it does not enter into itself and moves in single-minded intellectuality, i.e., thought capacity." One second, I want to make sure. So you're seeing the decisiveness with either or, right? It's either true or it's false. You have to make a decision. But the not only but also, there's not really a decisiveness there. And that makes sense because the soul doesn't rely on said decisiveness. The soul relies on sort of subsuming all. There is no one over the other. But of course, with the one over the other, that's where you get mental thinking. And you're seeing how aspects and characteristics of the soul are manifesting in the forms of realization and thought employed by mythical men. In the oceanic thought form, there is still a preponderance of the religare, or careful attention, characteristic of the mythical structure. It is a thinking process that still shows regard and is careful to neglect nothing so as not to disturb the balance by mere positing or postulation. This is accomplished in mythical religio by a constant regard for the respective complementary pole. There is even an echo of the magic moment in the auditory aspects, that is, in the rhythm and musicality of the expressive language, as well as in the endeavor to uphold a unification which in a manner corresponding to myth occurs through complementation. The same auditory and unifying moments, which we are attempting to make evident for oceanic thinking, have been identified by the Jewish religious philosopher Ben Joseph in the thought and expression of the Torah. So you're seeing a lot of oceanic thinking in the Torah, the Jewish sort of Bible, if you will. Oceanic thought is also characteristic of Lao Tzu and is also found in sentence after sentence as the typical form of thought and expression of Buddha. It is also the predominant form in the writings of the Gnostics, the mystics, natural philosophers, and not least the poets. So you're seeing this. You can see why those who rely on the quantifiably immeasurable, whether it be art or spiritual pursuits, would employ oceanic thinking because they are in tune with the soul, with spirit. They are in tune with the mythical consciousness structure, and everything with the mythical is the 2D flat circle. So yeah, when you're reading the Bhagavad Gita, keep that in mind. You know, you don't have to just get confused and throw it in the ground. Just come back to this video, learn it again, and then you're going to be good. Among its adherents, oceanic thought can number not only Oriental sages and rabbinical scholars, but alongside Heraclitus and St. John, even to a certain degree, Saints Paul and Augustine, and by all means the Neoplatonists Proclus, Dionysius Areopagita, Johannes Scotus Erigena, and Nicholas Cusanus. Others include Eckhart Suso, Giordano Bruno, and Jacob Boehme, or Boehme, whatever. Schelling, and to some extent Hegel, as well as Goethe, and two recent poets, Strindberg, who in his play To Damascus has the scenes unfold backwards from the middle of the play, thus returning to the beginning with the final scene. So I included that just for you philosophy guys, and there are other examples of manifestations of the oceanic thinking. And if you go back and read it, now you have a different way of understanding these things. And Platon, who was a master of the roundel, a form later revived and reshaped by George Trekkel. Subsided has the gold of day, the evening's brown and bluish hues, the shepherd's soft intoning guide. The evening's brown and bluish hues, subsided has the gold of day. So you can see the thing I just read for you. Starts 1, starts 2, starts 3, 2, 1. It's got that circular motion. Begins and ends with the first two lines. By the way, this is where you get the mythical accounting like Magnolia, where everything unfolds in these cynical, nihilistic, pessimistic, fatalistic, mythical cycles, and you get crap movies like Magnolia. This unperspectable flux of thoughts and images is the strength as well as the weakness of this form of thought. It is strong because it is still intact, weak because it is inadequate to the demands of the mental structure. So that's obvious, right? So it is cool, and it's this form of oceanic thinking is useful when trying to think, if you will, about the soul and stuff like that. But when it's time to be rational, we're going to have some problems. So, of course, that is the obvious weakness of this form of thought. It's irrational. And when it's time to be rational, you don't want to deploy irrational thought. It is irrational where the other is rational, and perspectival where the other is perspectival. It circumscribes where the other describes. It is ambivalent where the other is trivalent. Above all, the mental, rational, perspectival thought form is directed, where oceanic thinking is a self-contained and enclosing self-complementation, which was reduced to rubble by perspectivity. There are today more than enough psychic ruins ravaging the world ever since thought lost its immediate directedness and qualitative mental character, and became deficient in the fragmentation of rationalization, sectorization, and perspectivization. Let us now turn to this nearly formless form of thinking. So that is what we'll be doing in the next video. We'll probably be doing perspectival thinking, and then paradoxical thinking. There's some really interesting connections he makes with paradoxical thinking. It's kind of like changed the way I view the rise of the political left and like the far left woke stuff. And we'll get to it. We'll get to it. It's interesting stuff. But I hope you guys enjoyed this video today. I hope this lecture was good enough. I've kind of gone through a little existential crisis. Am I doing a good enough job explaining it? I really hope I am. I haven't gotten too many complaints, but I don't know. I hope I'm doing a good enough job for you guys. I really hope I do. So please be patient with me. And I love you guys more than anything. We'll be getting into that next. So thank you guys again. I got a lot going on in my life right now. Thank you for the patience and the understanding. I love you guys. Thank you.